Hello, I'm James Goltz, and I'm a member of the Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kyoto University. My co-author for this presentation on the societal impacts of the Kumamoto earthquakes of April 2016 is Dr. Tomohide Atsumi of the Graduate School of Human Sciences of Osaka University. In this presentation, we'll focus on two aspects of societal impacts: sheltering and disaster volunteers. Our presentation is based primarily on field observation in Mashiki town and Nishihara village conducted between April 29th and May 1st, 2016. These observations are supplemented by informal discussions with the Mashiki shelter manager, Mr. Kazuki Yamane, evacuees and volunteer coordinators, content analysis of English language news reports from April 14th to May 3rd, 2016, official reports provided by prefectural and national agencies, and verbal reports and debriefings from Osaka University graduate students who also served as volunteers. The map on the left shows the area of Japan affected by the earthquakes, the island of Kyushu, and on the right, the location of our field work, which included observations in the severely damaged areas of Kumamoto City, Mashiki Town, and Nishihara Village. Between April 14th and 16th, there were several significant earthquakes with JMA ground motions reaching intensity 6+. The two most damaging earthquakes occurred at 9:26 p.m. Japan Standard Time, Thursday, April 14th, a JMA magnitude 6.5, or a moment magnitude of 6.2, and a second larger event at 1:25 a.m. on Saturday, April 16th, a JMA magnitude 7.3 and a moment magnitude of 7.0. Both of these events reached JMA intensity level 7 and caused damage and fatalities. The map on the left shows both of the major earthquakes and their aftershocks. The 6.2 foreshock is believed to have occurred on the Hingaku Fault, and the magnitude 7 ruptured along the Futagawa Fault, triggering additional earthquakes in Oita Prefecture to the northeast. The U.S. Geological Survey shake map on the right shows the intensity distribution for the magnitude 7 event. There were 50 fatalities in the two earthquakes, 9 in the April 14th magnitude 6.2 and 41 in the main shock on April 16th. 19 people died of causes indirectly related to the earthquakes. Most had pre-existing medical conditions that were exacerbated by the difficult conditions in the aftermath of the earthquakes. There were 1,666 injuries. 350 were serious, that is, life-threatening without treatment, and 1,316 were minor to moderate. The displaced population reached a total of 180,000, with approximately half that number seeking shelter at public shelters that included public buildings, recreation centers, schools, 2 ferry boats, and according to a report that appeared in the Yomiuri Shimbun on April 21st, 2016, even the Kumamoto prison opened a wing to evacuees. The same newspaper reported a total of 623 shelters on April 21st. Many people, fearful of structural collapse, sought shelter in their cars. Nearly 150,000 residential buildings were damaged, with 7,900 collapses and over 23,000 with significant damage. A total of 243 public buildings were damaged and over 1,300 commercial buildings were damaged. The region is now moving into the recovery phase with over 3,300 temporary houses under construction as of June 30th. The losses are estimated to be between 2.4 and 4.6 billion yen. We arrived in Kumamoto City via the Shinkansen to begin our field reconnaissance, a route which Japan Railways had resumed running on the day of our arrival, April 29th, following a derailment caused by the April 16th earthquake. Our first observations were of large piles of discarded household items that had been damaged or destroyed, evidence of considerable non-structural and contents damage caused by the earthquakes. We also noted that for many homes that had no apparent structural damage, tarps had been placed covering the roofs, indicative of damaged tiles. The displaced population was initially estimated to be approximately 180,000, with those seeking public shelter ranging between 90 and 120,000 immediately following the April 16th earthquake. These numbers declined steadily, and by the end of April, there were about 30,000 people still reported as evacuees. In Mashiki town, over half of the 5,400 homes were damaged, 2,300 of which were severely damaged or collapsed in the earthquake. Mashiki also had 21 of the 50 fatalities. Mashiki town was the focus of our field investigation of sheltering, and due to the short duration of our field work, we chose to examine in some detail this shelter in closest proximity to the worst damaged areas of town. In the vicinity of this shelter, 80% of the houses had collapsed. Prior to becoming an evacuation shelter, the building and grounds served as the Mashiki Sports Complex, a facility owned by Mashiki Town and managed by the YMCA. At the time of our field work, there were 1,300 evacuees housed in the building, in tents or in evacuee-owned vehicles parked in the parking lot. As of the end of June, 1,900 people were still in shelters in Mashiki town. Inside the sports complex building, conditions were very crowded, with only enough individual space for sleeping and a few possessions. I took only this photo of the entrance of the building due to privacy concerns. There was no structural damage to the building, but the gymnasium's ceiling tiles and bracing had fallen, and there was some subsidence around the foundation. There appeared to be adequate water, food, and sanitation facilities to support the evacuee population. Basic medical care was provided for evacuees by the Japanese Red Cross. Prescription medicine was available and pharmacists were on site. Sanitation, showers, and drinking water were available through the self-defense forces. In addition to the first aid station, Red Cross workers conducted periodic walk-arounds to encourage those sheltering in parked vehicles to exercise. They also assessed any health care needs they may have had. In addition to the building, the extensive grounds of the sports complex also accommodated tents for large families and families with pets. Those sheltering in tents had available to them all of the facilities and services available to those housed in the building. Smaller tents donated by an outdoor recreation company provided additional capacity for Mashiki evacuees. The Japanese government deployed a total of 26,000 members of the self-defense Army, Navy, and Air Force to assist in disaster response. Their duties were varied. At the Mashiki Sports Complex, they prepared and served meals, maintained sanitation facilities, including portable toilets and showers, and provided entertainment by military band members. While shortages of food and water had been reported in the few days after the shelters opened, by the time of our reconnaissance at the end of April, there appeared to be adequate food and water at this shelter. However, long lines and lengthy waits were common for food service. During our visits to this shelter, we observed many people who chose to shelter in vehicles. Early news accounts noted that thousands of people had chosen this form of evacuation due to recurrent aftershocks and fear of additional large earthquakes. Significant rainfall in the days following the earthquakes caused these evacuees to spend many consecutive hours confined in small spaces, giving rise to concerns about economy class syndrome, in which blood clots form in the legs due to inactivity, a condition that could result in death. There were 35 confirmed cases of this syndrome and at least one fatality. Some of the worst damage to residential structures occurred within view of the Mashiki sports complex. In the photo on the right is a completely collapsed single-family home with the roof of the shelter in the background. Nearly every house within this residential section of Mashiki had been red tagged and declared unsafe to enter. A common sight just a short distance from the shelter. Shrines and temples were also severely damaged in the earthquakes. On the left is a photo of the Kankokyu Shrine, which had partially collapsed and was red tagged. At right is a hair salon, which completely collapsed. Near the Mashiki Sports Complex was a debris dump site. Cars and small trucks waited for long periods on the streets and roads leading to the dump site, creating severe traffic jams as well as air and noise pollution. Since the Hanshin-Awaji Kobe earthquake of 1995, disaster volunteers have responded to local and regional disasters in Japan. We observed volunteers in both Mashiki town and Nishihara village during our reconnaissance. The Mashiki Volunteer Center registered and processed about 500 volunteers per day at the time of our field observation. The centers were operated and volunteer activities coordinated by local welfare council personnel with support from the National Social Welfare Council in Tokyo and supplemented by experienced members of volunteer organizations from other areas of Japan, like the Nippon Volunteer Network, active in disaster. This volunteer assembly center was located in the parking lot of a Nishihara business complex. On the day this photo was taken, April 30th, approximately 300 volunteers reported. Many were young people who would spend their Golden Week holidays assisting in response to the Kyushu earthquakes. Volunteers were registered, given identification, and briefed before being deployed to 3 satellite centers in the areas of greatest damage. After registering and briefing on tasks to be undertaken, small groups were deployed to satellite centers where they were assigned tasks which included assisting in debris removal, cleanup, needs assessments, and providing a sympathetic ear for those who had suffered during the earthquakes. A small group of volunteers from Osaka University obtained permission from the Mashiki shelter to offer footbaths to evacuees. This activity is frequently employed by members of the Nippon Volunteer Network to provide a relaxing and therapeutic environment for disaster survivors to speak of their disaster experience. We saw many elderly evacuees at the Mashiki shelter. Older adults are more likely than younger people to be victims of disaster and experience greater trauma as sheltered evacuees. Of the fatalities indirectly related to the earthquake, most were elderly people with pre-existing medical conditions exacerbated by stress and harsh conditions following the earthquakes. In closing, Kyushu faced not one, but a series of large earthquakes culminating in a magnitude 7 event. The largest of these earthquakes in the sequence caused considerable damage to residential structures, religious sites, and small and medium-sized businesses. Sheltering was a major challenge, with an initial displaced population of approximately 180,000 people. The region benefited from the outpouring of volunteers and the support services provided by the Japanese Self-Defense Forces as well as other organized volunteer organizations. I would like to thank the Disaster Prevention Research Institute for supporting my travel to Kumamoto Prefecture for our 3-day reconnaissance, April 29th to May 1st, 2016. I also appreciate the arrangements made by Dr. Tomohide Atsumi and several of his graduate students for us to spend 3 days in Kumamoto Prefecture. We gratefully acknowledge the volunteer services of several hundred volunteers whose valuable assistance contributed to the relief of suffering and to a more effective response.